Hello, my name is Allison Carmen, and welcome to my podcast, 10 Minutes to Less Suffering. Today I took both my daughters to see the play Gloria a Life. It is playing in a small theater in the middle of New York City. I wanted my daughters to see the play because it's about the life of Gloria Steinem. For those of you who don't know who Gloria Steinem is, she's a feminist and an activist. She was also the founder of Ms. magazine, and she spent most of her life fighting for women's rights. One of the most interesting things about the play is that you saw as Gloria moved forward, she was vulnerable to what other people said about her. Although she never stopped, she did suffer pain from all the criticism. And as she got older, she realized that her pain came from a sense that she wanted to belong, and she felt like she didn't. Just like many other women in society, she had an issue with self-worth and self-love. Gloria Steinem was very strong that she was able to step out of the box and to help foster these amazing changes in our society. But not all of us are able to stand tall when we have self-doubt, when we don't have a strong identity, and that we don't love ourselves. And this reminds me of a story of when I got my first job as a lawyer at a large law firm in New York City. I had no idea what feminism was. I thought I was equal in college, I was equal in law school, and I would be equal in the workplace. And as time went on, I saw that I was not being treated the same as a lot of my male colleagues. And one day, a fellow came to my office. I was on one of his projects, and I felt that he spoke down to me. He was yelling at me, he was condescending. When he left my office, I asked my office mate who that was, and he gave me his name. I looked up his name in the directory, and I called him. And I asked him if he was a partner, and he said no. And I said, well, until you're a partner, don't come into my room and speak to me like that ever again. I felt really good about it. I felt like I was standing up for myself. I felt like I was setting a boundary of how I wanted to be treated in the workplace. Little did I know that this associate would go back to the partner he worked for, which happened to be a woman, and relay the story, his own version of the story. She called me up to her office, and she reprimanded me. She reprimanded me for speaking to her associate like that. I was removed from all her projects, and I believe to this day if she could have fired me, she would have, but I was not in her department. After this incident happened, I regretted it. I allowed the voices in the outside world to make me feel like I was wrong. And because I didn't have a strong sense of self, and I didn't love myself, I started to doubt myself. So instead of being a victim of permitting someone to treat me that way, I created my own victimhood by not loving myself enough and putting myself down for that. I remember another time in the office, a lawyer who was 1 year behind me. When he would come in to work on projects with me, he stared at my breasts. It made me feel uncomfortable, but I never said anything because I thought, oh, maybe it's my imagination. And how uncomfortable would it be for me to say something? But as every day went by, he would stare at my breasts more and more. And finally, one day, I turned around to him and said, I would appreciate if you stopped staring at my breasts. Now, I realized that today maybe you would go to human resources or you would speak to a partner, but back then the rules were not clear. So I decided it was unacceptable for me to be in this situation, and I said something. Of course, he denied it, but he never stared at my breasts again. The problem became is that he told everybody in the office. I guess he thought if he beat me to it, he could make a joke of it, and he could make light of it, and he could make it like there's something wrong with me. And that's what happens so often, that we find the sense within ourselves of what we need to say and what we need to do. And then if we do it, and if it's against the grain, or it offends somebody that's stronger than us, the outside world will try to make us think that we're crazy. So I became the big joke in the office. I became the woman who thinks that men stare at her breasts. And everybody would tease me about it. And I know today it would be totally inappropriate, and there would be rules and there would be regulations of how it would be dealt with, but at the time there weren't. And again, because I didn't love myself, and because I didn't have a strong sense of identity, I became a victim of my own thoughts. I regretted saying something. I felt bad about myself. I felt embarrassed. So every time I tried to create new rules, a boundary for self-respect, to honor myself, to be treated the way that I wanted to be treated in the world, I ended up punishing myself. So this is why I want to talk today about this. That there are a lot of people that tell us to go out, set your own rules, be original, go on your own path. And that's a beautiful thing. and one of the most important things we can do in life. But if we don't work on our identity first and our self love and our self worth, the path can almost destroy us as much as if we stayed conforming or we stayed in the mainstream. And I'm not telling anybody to wait until the perfect moment where you love yourself so much that nothing will bother you. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we need to look at this too. Because when we start to make these changes, we have to be as solid as we can on the inside so these changes don't destroy us, so they don't eat us up inside. I actually think my aggravation and my self-doubt and my lack of self-love regarding how that man treated me the day he came into my office was worse than how he spoke to me. I think my level of embarrassment and doubt and unhappiness that I said something about that man staring at my breasts was worse than him staring at my breasts for me, because I tortured myself. Today, of course, I would be different because I have a different level of self-love. I have a stronger identity. But at the time, it really hurt and it caused me a lot of pain. So how can we do this? What are the first steps that we can take? One of the first questions I like to ask myself is, can I control the person's reaction outside of me? Now, I know many of you have heard this before, but it's very important. When you acknowledge you can only control yourself, you make a choice. It's actually choosing you over the outside world. And it's best to go back to the place of your own source, of your own power. And it's a very kind and loving thing that you could do for yourself to go back to your own center. It's like embracing yourself. It's like acknowledging that you are your own best friend. The second thing you could do after you realize there's only one thing you can control is to ask yourself, what do you need? And it's such a precious thing in the moment when you're being challenged. Instead of asking what the person who's challenging you needs, you're asking, what do you need? And it's such a loving thought to go to yourself first. And sometimes that need might be to help somebody, but sometimes that need is to pause and to acknowledge yourself. It's to be kind to yourself. It's to understand yourself. Understand that the need is to live an authentic life. The third question you could ask yourself is, what action can I take to satisfy this need? Your answer sometimes might be, I need to do this. I need to be free. I need to say something because this is not acceptable. And make sure you write these things down because you might need to go back and reflect on them if you're challenged or you're criticized for the decisions that you make. And then after you act, the fourth thing is to stay in maybe. Maybe is one of the biggest acts of love you could possibly do for yourself. It's like letting yourself off the hook. Because sometimes we're so sure when something happens, we said something, and someone reacted poorly, we think we know what's going to happen after that. And with maybe you realize you have no idea what's going to happen next. If you end up getting fired, if you have a failed project, if you say something and people get mad at you, you have no idea what the ripple effect would be. And you have no idea what will happen next month or next year. And sometimes it takes time for change. And maybe reminds you of that. Maybe reminds you that within the unknown, there's hope and possibility. There's hope for all of us. You could use maybe statements like, maybe everything is okay. Maybe it's good that I said something. Maybe I need to give this more time. Maybe I did nothing wrong. And sure, you can contemplate that maybe I need to rethink my actions. But often when we're acting from our authentic self and we're loving ourselves and we're being truthful, we did the right thing. And life will keep unfolding. And we can't let uncertainty knock us down. Because when we do, we're not truly loving ourselves. We're not loving ourselves because we're not believing that our actions could ever lead to anything beautiful or wonderful. So when we look at women like Gloria Steinem, we are all capable of living an authentic life. And we are all capable of having impact and making changes. But it's so much easier if we take the time to love ourselves so the outside world doesn't make us feel crazy, and create a more authentic, honest life for ourselves, and hopefully a better world for everyone. If you like this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can email me at allison@allisoncarmen.com. My book, The Gift of Maybe, is available at all major bookstores and online retailers.